Hello, everyone. Today we have Todd Thurman here in the Swine podcast show. How are you, Todd?
I'm great. How are you, Marcio?
Good, good. Thanks for joining here today. And I know you're getting a little bored without that many trips, with the COVID right now. And I'm happy to have you today here on the show. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So our goal here, we don't have a specific, I know we have some topics we want to cover, but nothing specifically. Something we discussed about the fundamentals taught in farm. I think we can start with that. But also for the folks that don't know you, if you can share, your background and what we do today.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in the Texas Panhandle in Amarillo, Texas. And I tell people I grew up around agriculture, but not really in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an environmental chemist, and my mom had a master's degree in social work. And then you go back a little bit further, and there's a lot of agriculture in my family tree, but it maybe skipped a generation or two. But because I was so surrounded by agriculture in that community that's so influenced by agriculture, I ended up getting a couple of jobs as a teenager, working in the ag field, and just really very quickly developed a passion for it, and knew really early on that that's what I wanted to do with my career. And so I ended up, after high school, I went to a junior college at Clarendon College and participated in the livestock judging team. Did that for 2 years, and then I transferred to Texas Tech University. And there, instead of judging livestock, I decided to get a job at the research farm.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really good opportunity for me to get exposed to working on a farm every day, working on a pig farm every day, and then also getting to be part of the research that was being done by Dr. John McGlone and his staff there at the Texas Tech Swine Research Center at the time. So it was a great opportunity to get some early exposure to some practical aspects of pork production, and also be able to be a part of some pretty exciting initiatives on the research side. When I graduated from Texas Tech, I ended up with a bachelor's degree in animal science with a production emphasis, and went to work for Cargill straight out of college. Ended up working for Cargill for about 15 years total. I spent about 7 years with Cargill Pork, which was the live production division of Cargill at the time, subsequently been sold to JBS.
Mm-hmm.
But I was there for about 7 years and had several different jobs there, but for the most of that time was responsible for commercial sow production for about half of their sows. So I had about 55,000 sows over 3 states.
Wow.
And so that was the majority of that time there. Really just focused on business management and production management for that group of farms. And then I stayed with Cargill and moved over to Cargill Animal Nutrition, but kept doing a lot of the same things. I was with the nutrition division, but still very focused on production. And so I got to learn a lot about nutrition and applied nutrition, and really helped kind of make me a more well-rounded production guy, I guess. But I was still very much focused on production and helped supporting that internal team on the nutrition side, and then also working with some of the key accounts directly. It also gave me the opportunity to start doing some international work, and I ended up transferring for 2 years to Russia, and helped a client start up a 25,000 sow fair to finish system there in Russia. So I was there full-time for 2 years, and then back and forth for another year or so. And then when I came back to the U.S., I guess they figured if I would go to Russia, I'd go just about anywhere. So they started sending me to a lot of different places around the world, and I started getting a lot of exposure to the international scene, and spent a lot of time in Asia and Latin America, and of course in Europe as well. So ended up leaving Cargill, spent 3 years with Genesis Genetics, was focused about 50% North America, 50% Asia. And a big part of that was key accounts in the US and in China, and then also business development in the Philippines. So did that for about 3 years, business development role, along with a little bit of technical support as well. And then about 3 years ago, in fact, almost exactly 3 years ago, I started SwineTex Consulting Services. And I've been doing that for, I think, July 1st was our third anniversary. So I'm sure we beat some statistics there, but it's been a great opportunity to really build on kind of my background. And so we're about 45% training, about 45% consulting, and then another 10% is what we call SwineTex Insights, which is really working with industry participants and allied industry to kind of help uncover opportunities, look at expansion opportunities, M&A, really people that might have a product that's got some application in, say, the poultry industry, and they want to see what those applications might look like in the swine industry, some of those types of things. So it's a relatively small part of my business, maybe 10%, but it's probably the most visible part of my business. So it's 10% of my business, but it's most likely where you've seen me, if you've seen me out and about, because that's where we do our reaching out through social media and speaking engagements and things of that nature.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And yeah, social media is something that I know you are very active there, myself as well, and I wish more folks would get involved. I think people, I don't know, what do you think? I think people get get scared of something, or of commenting or discussing topics. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I learned early on was, for every person that interacts or engages you on social media, there's probably 100 that are watching and listening and taking in the discussion, but aren't actively participating. So I'd sure like to see more participation, but I think you got to keep in mind that your audience is probably much bigger than what you think it is. I know I've been surprised. I've actually been recognized in a couple of airports and things like that.
That's funny.
And you just you kind of just put things out, and it goes out into the ether, and you kind of wonder who's even listening. But there's a lot more people listening than what you think. So that's encouraging, I think, in terms of getting a message out.
Yeah, because I think in the beginning, if you go back, I don't know, 5-10 years or more, people look at social media as whatever, it's a waste of time, right? I think today it's a good way for people in the industry to cause not only impact within the industry, but also, of course, outside, just from overall consumer perception, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a great tool, and we certainly try to do what we can, but we're not professionals by any stretch of the imagination. But it's definitely a great way to communicate, like you said, within the industry, and then actually even outside the industry, and be able to increase awareness of what we do and how we do it. I think is important for us to be engaged in that dialogue, even though it's not always easy, and sometimes very frustrating, and you feel like you're being attacked from all sides. But I think engaging in that discussion is important.
Super cool. So what are your thoughts on farms in general? I think you probably focus more on sow farms, right? So the focus on the fundamentals.
Yeah, so we're probably a little heavier focus on sow farms. We also spend quite a bit of time on the rearing to finish piece as well. So I'd say probably 65-35 maybe in favor of the sow side. But I really try to encourage people to talk about fundamentals and focus on those fundamentals, and I think it's one of the most challenging and important things that a consultant does, is get people focused on the right things that are the most important, and sometimes more importantly, to keep them from focusing on the wrong things. And I shouldn't really say wrong thing. This is not necessarily the wrong things to be focused on. It's just you're focusing on lesser value things and ignoring higher value things. And most often, those are the basics and the fundamentals. And so, everybody wants that secret sauce or that silver bullet to solve their problems, and that little tip or trick. And, the unfortunate news is I disappoint people and tell them that there's not a, special tip or trick. It's not a secret. It's implementing effectively and consistently those fundamentals every day. So that's the difference between the bad farms and the good farms, and the good farms and the great farms is they're implementation of those fundamentals. And so it's most of the time people want me to teach them something new, but we're very focused on getting results. When I started my consulting business, I did not want to be a peddler of information, right? I didn't want to be the kind of guy that says, okay, well, here's the right answer, and then whatever you do with that, is up to you, right? That, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that just doesn't appeal to me. I want to be part of making a difference on those farms and actually seeing results. And so that's where it becomes much more challenging in my view, because you have to take that information and then transform that information into results on farms. And that's where it gets a lot more complicated. So just giving the right answer is not enough. It's how do we take that information and get it implemented on the farms.
Right. So really understanding the problem before coming up with a solution. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
That makes total sense. Of course, every farm is different, but in general, based on your experience, when you think about sow farms, what are the, say, top 3 things there on the fundamentals that you've seen the biggest ROI or lowest hanging fruit there?
By far the most common thing that I see is issues around sow body condition, and primarily in lactation feeding on sows. That's just where the hang up is. It's not necessarily that the other phases are not important. They certainly are, but the most common issue that I see, if you kind of break it down into the root causes, is lactation feeding in sows. And so I would say on upwards of 80% of my initial farm visits, that's at least kind of makes the cut in terms of those top issues. Certainly see those as a huge opportunity, and it's not even close, really. But a couple of others that really come to mind is gilt development and gilt selection. I really just think as an overall industry, I'm always trying to think, what are those things we're going to look back on 20 years from now that we're doing today and think, wow, that was crazy, and I think a lot of those for our industry will revolve around gilt development, gilt selection, that we just did not pay enough attention to such a crucial part of our business. And so that's another area where I see a ton of opportunity, not just in terms of application on a farm, but at a deeper level in research, and I see a lot of potential research opportunities there to better understand what we need to be doing differently there, what we need to be doing better. And then the last thing that just pops into my head, I guess, is that early pig care. What do you do in that first 8 hours of life, because it just has such a big impact on everything else. And I like to tell people, I have some areas that I've identified that I call inflection points that are just, they're not necessarily more important than any others, except for the fact that when you do them right, they have kind of a domino effect and make everything else a little bit easier. And so those are definitely 3 that are on that list that are directly related to sow production. And man, you put those 3 together, and I would say it's the percentage of the work that I do, it's pretty high. I end up talking about those 3 things a lot.
Yes, and I'd say that the first one you mentioned matches my bias as well. My experience visiting farms is that at least more than half of them probably overweight, but the sow farm managers say, nah, they're fine. Right. Well, it's because you're there every day, right? That's the first thing, I think. And the other comment is, so I went to grad school as a swine nutritionist, and then after that working and you talk about all these nutrient levels and all those things, right? But then back to what you said, the whole body condition, it's the single most important thing in the sow side of things when it comes to nutrition and feeding, for that matter. It's amazing. And the other comment I have on that one is that is one of the few areas in pig production that you can save money and improve performance, right? Otherwise, it's super hard to find that match.
No, I think that's right, and it's really about finding a balance, and that's where the challenge lies. It's very hard to give someone a prescription for this is what I always tell people. People want to tell me they want me to come in and teach them what to feed their sows. And I tell them I can't. I have to teach you how to feed sows, right? Not what to feed them, you know. And it's not that complicated, but it is something that requires, you know, some effort on the part of the farm staff to, you know, not just say, okay, well, this sow needs X amount of feed per day. You know, I'm going to have to teach you the thought processes that you have to go through to try to make sure that we're meeting that sow's needs in an efficient way.
Yes. And you know, one thing on this arena that I find interesting is that I think sow, even my mom that has never seen a pig before, can say, wow, she looks thin, right? But a fat sow, it's not that easy for someone that doesn't have a whole lot of experience. So I think that's part of the problem too.
No, I agree with that. And certainly that's an issue almost everywhere that I go, but it's a really big issue in Asia. I mean, it's almost every farm I go to, the sows are over-conditioned. And it's just this very old, very ingrained mentality of, we've got to get these sows really fat coming into the fairing house because we know they're not going to eat very good. And we know they're going to lose a lot of weight, right? And we still want them looking good when they come out. And, you know, just that concept of trying to help them understand, it's not necessarily, you know, her condition when she comes out, it's how much did she lose while she was in there. And so, you know, beating that mentality in Asia is a monumental undertaking, and something that, you know, I had to spend an inordinate amount of time talking about. But it's just so important. It's not something I can skip, right? It's not something I can just say, wow, there's a lot of resistance there, we'll just move on to something else. It's that important. It has to be addressed, and so you have to do the hard work about getting those changes made.
Right. That idea of, hey, I'll give a little more, I'll get to farrowing with a little more back fat so they can burn. It's not a good strategy.
Yeah, and well, and it does make some, you know, sort of intuitive sense if you're talking about body condition, but when you look at the biology and start to break it down, it really doesn't make sense, and really actually you're contributing to the problem. And, you know, when I tell people, even today, when I tell clients and new clients in China, I'd rather your sows be a little thin than a little heavy. You know, that's just a really hard concept for them to grasp. You know, I don't want them to be thin or heavy. I want them to be just right. But you know, if I had to choose, I'd sure rather go on the other side, because, you know, it's a lot easier to get that condition back on that sow when we get her out of the fairing house than it is to deal with the issues that come along with an over-conditioned sow in the fairing house.
Right. And she's probably going to win. Well, we have good data now showing that, you know, over several parities, just retention rate and those kind of things too. You know, it's going to be better for them. Super cool. When you think about, I know you and I, before the podcast, we talked about high leverage activities on farms. Are these the same ones that you just described, or something else?
Yeah. So for the sow farm, those I have really 6 that I focus on heavily, and several of those 3 that I've already mentioned are definitely on there. Gilt selection, day 1 pig care, lactation, sow feeding. Another one is heat detection. That's one that you don't hear a lot of people talking about these days, and I think everybody thinks that we're going to probably have some technology at some point where we don't have to worry about that anymore. But it's maybe not the most exciting topic, but it's one that I still see a big opportunity in. And so I hear a lot of talk about people come in and want me to talk about breeding techniques and you know, what we need to do there. And I always tell them, if you do a good job of heat detection, a lot of that other stuff takes care of itself. So it's still one of those persistent problems that I see in a lot of places around the world. And then the other 2 that, you know, aren't really sow farm related would be those first 7 to 10 days post-wean. You know, I think, you know, when it comes to, you know, the wean to finish segment, you know, if we get that right, everything else gets a lot easier. And if we get that wrong, it's almost like a hole that you can't quite ever dig out of. And so we spend a lot of time talking about how to get those pigs on feed, how to identify, you know, those pigs that are falling back quickly so that we can get in there and intervene. Because if we wait too long, there's nothing you can do to get in there and get that back. And so we spent a lot of time focusing on that. And then on the extreme other end, the last one of the 6 would be marketing of market hogs,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that we don't give away a lot of the advantages we worked so hard to gain, during that last 6 months or whatever it is. We see that a lot. We send them to market and we fail to capitalize on that, so we don't get the right pigs to the right market at the right time, and when we do that, we're not maximizing our revenue, and that's really unfortunate when you spent all that time and put all that effort, and then it's just kind of a lack of focus. You let some of that potential revenue slip through the cracks, and we don't want that to happen.
Yes, and I don't know what you saw in Asia, but I know in South America, the whole idea of marketing strategies and different cuts, it's not as common as I see here in the West. There is, but it's not as common. What do you see about that in Asia?
Yeah, I mean, one of the bigger challenges that we deal with in Asia is there's still a lot of those pigs that are marketed through a broker system, where you basically have still have a guy that comes in and selects which pigs he wants to buy, and obviously that is part of the biosecurity concern is having these guys coming from farm to farm is just a nightmare scenario from a biosecurity standpoint. But it also kind of obscures the need to have those animals in the right place at the right time and get them ready. And so sometimes you have those animals ready and they can't take them because they just have a certain quota that they need. And so that gets to be a challenge because it's really out of the control of the producer in some cases. And so that's something we have to focus on, and that's changing, and I think that's changing faster because of the focus on biosecurity, the focus on kind of modernizing those supply chains. And so I see that over the next 5 years as a big opportunity for Asia, because in the past they've not thought about that at all because it was largely out of their control. But that is, as things modernize and things happen quickly, that's going to become very important. And so that's an area where there's not a lot of expertise, and there's going to be some real needs there over the next couple of years for them to for the first time in some cases focusing on how to maximize that. The other issue that you deal with in Asia is that a lot of evaluation is still subjective. So you have basically one guy's opinion on you. So you hear about body shape, and I'm always frustrated by that because I don't know what body shape means, right?
And
your idea of body shape and my idea of body shape are two different things, and so we really need to get to more of an objective measurement to define what they're looking for. So that communication between the processors and the farmers is not good at all. We're maybe a little bit frustrated with, even in the West, where there's some disconnects there between the messages that the packer is sending the producer, but it's nothing compared to Asia, where there's basically just almost no communication at all. And so as that changes, that's another big opportunity.
Wow. What do you see from a overall system design standpoint, that I know you work a lot with it? What are the biggest struggles there or opportunities?
Yeah, so I think as in the developing markets that I work in, primarily in Asia, a big part of the problem is they're growing so quickly, right? And so everything is sort of compressed, and it just happens really fast. And so that can be good and it can be bad if things are going to happen quickly either way. So if you're doing a good job and you're thinking through your system design, then that can be an okay thing. But when you're I always tell people in Asia in general, in China specifically, it's let's build it and then figure it out later, right? And so they're really good at getting things done in terms of taking action, but not always so good about planning ahead. And so that's one of the things that I really try to preach to the larger integrators that I work with in Asia is it really pays to think through that ahead of time, and then execute a well-planned strategy. you're gonna have a lot fewer regrets when you get finished. And so it's really about trying to create some consistency, and let's think about how to grow this system in a way that it's going to be easier to manage. And I know, when I in the past have brought some of my Asian clients back to the U.S., and that's one of the things I always try to get my clients here in the U.S. that are talking to them, giving them advice to reinforce. If you have everything that's sort of set up and you've got most of your farms are the same size and roughly the same design, and your pig flow is sort of makes sense, it becomes much easier to manage as opposed to a hodgepodge of all different size farms and different technology and all those kind of things. So the more consistent we can be in that, I think that's going to be a huge advantage for those guys.
Interesting. And something that comes to mind there, Todd, is that maybe a lot of folks in the U.S. don't realize, but I think it's when I came to the U.S. first, I really noticed that culturally, I think the U.S. is pretty good in planning ahead. And I could realize that even in small settings, like not even pig related sometimes, just being, what we're going to do and blah, 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 which I think for most people in the US is like, well, that's just the way it is, right? But even coming from Brazil to the US, that was a very interesting thing. And of course, might be talking about a little bit of an extreme there from a production standpoint when you think about that in Asia, but it's something that caught my attention, culturally speaking.
Sure.
How about the labor and the future of labor in farms? What do you have in mind there on this topic, Todd?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time focused on that, and I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about the differences in different systems, because I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different places. I spent quite a bit of time in Brazil, like obviously spent some time in Russia and Eastern Europe, and then in Asia, and then of course obviously here in North America. And so I spend a lot of time talking about those contrasts and the differences. But the one area that is consistent everywhere I've been is labor challenges. That's always, I think about making a list of those things that keep you up at night if you're managing a pig business. Those are the things that really concern people. So finding and keeping good, qualified, skilled labor is a huge challenge for virtually everyone. Now, in different countries, in different situations, it might look, the details might look a little different, but as an overarching concern, labor in general is one that everyone has in common. Everyone I talk to is concerned about that, and it's extremely important, right? Again, the other thing, since I get to see a lot of farms, people ask me, what are the differences between the good farms and the not so good farms? And I tell them, that it's, a focus on fundamentals like we've talked about, but that it really gets down to people, because I've seen, good facilities are great, right? But I've seen some really good farms and some pretty average facilities, and so there's a lot of pieces there that are nice to have, but the one difference that I've never seen a high producing farm that didn't have really good people. And so, that's the one that's the common thread through all of those good farms is good people. And so that's easy to say and really hard to do. But I think that's actually one of those things that's actually getting harder. Right? It's becoming a bigger challenge day to day. And so finding the right people and getting them interested and engaged in agriculture to want to do this kind of work is a big challenge. So I really think to me, it comes back to trying to find a sort of a craftsman is really what you're looking for. We talk about the technology and stuff like that, these technological advances on these farms, and be able to operate these systems and these tools that we have available to us from a technological standpoint. But all those old husbandry skills are still important, right? So it's the combination of those two things that's hard to find. And I think that's the real challenge, is somebody that can be, capable enough and technologically savvy enough to be able to incorporate those tools that are becoming increasingly available to us effectively, but also still be able to handle the art side of what we do. And that sometimes you just have a feeling, and sometimes, you know, it's about observation skills and just being able to notice things that other people don't notice. And so, you know, that really is a lot of problems and not a lot of answers. But I think the answers really come down to focusing on those skills, but more importantly, those characteristics. I think as we try to find the right people to work on these farms, we need to be less concerned about what experience they have in the industry and what technical skills they have, and be more concerned with getting the people with the right characteristics. People that are patient, people that have attention to detail, people that enjoy working with animals, you know, those kind of things. You give me those type of people, and I can teach them everything they need to know to be successful from a technical standpoint. And so I think, you know, more of a focus on those characteristics that are common in successful workers on these farms. I think identifying those and being able to recruit people that exhibit those characteristics, I think is going to be a really important part of the strategy as we move forward.
Sense of urgency is something that I think, you know, you mentioned the early pig care. Boy, you know, if you don't have sense of urgency, it's a tough one to run some of that.
It's really about priorities, you know. You know, I see this all the time, just coaching that I give people. I come in and, you know, they're working on some, you know, minor issue, and there's a sow in the farrowing house standing there, you know, banging on her feeder, wants to eat, you know. You know, you've got to be able to recognize and make those decisions. And those are decision-making skills, you know, being able to determine, you know, what's more important than, you know, between these two activities, what should I be focusing on, and what can wait, you know, for an hour or two, or maybe that can be put off till the next day. A sense of priorities is really important. And so I really focus on coaching people on identifying the high priorities and make sure you get that stuff done, and then some of that other stuff can wait.
Very good. And then trying to retain the people too, right? That's also a challenge. One comment I have in my experience, I remember two things, right? One is I remember some farms when I was back in Brazil where the shower when you're getting to the farm, it's cold. It's like, okay, and you want your folks, your team to shower when they get into the farm in the winter time here with stuff. And now the other one was here in the West, where I went to a farm, extremely high farming system, and I got my attention that it's gonna be silly, right? But the shampoo. So the shampoo, that's detail, I think, but it means, hey, this system is willing to spend, I don't know, what dollar more on this shampoo. Just, I don't know, just make you feel good when you're getting the farm, getting out of the farm. Just, I think details like that compound on your retention rate is my feeling.
No, I agree. And I know in China, it's becoming a huge issue. You know, we think of China as being this huge population, and there's plenty of people, but we're also in a massive migration. And so where these farms are located, these people are moving to the cities. And so there's fewer and fewer people. It's kind of crazy that it's a country of 1.5 billion people, and we have major shortages of qualified labor in a lot of these locations where we have these farms. And so I'm coaching, you know, some of these farm owners that you're competing now with jobs in the city, right? You're going after some of those same people. So it's not about, you know, tapping into a labor force that doesn't have many other opportunities. You need to think about, you're competing with college graduates that have real opportunities, you know, in the city to do a desk job, you know. And so it's really important that you find the right people, identify those people, recruit them, get them into your system. And then, like you mentioned, sometimes it's just such simple things like that. Just really basic things that show that you care about your employees, and you're trying to create an environment that's as friendly as possible to those employees. You know, this is still tough work. It's hard. It's stinky. It's sometimes hot, and you know, it's still physical labor. And so, you know, we need to do whatever we can improve that working environment for those employees. And like you said, it's sometimes really simple things, and it just amazes me in China. I keep meeting with these farm owners that appear to be running a prison, right? In terms of the environment that they're having their employees endure. And in China, it's even more important because they actually live there on the farm. So they're on the farm for months at a time. So that work environment extends. It's not just their work environment. That's their home environment too, basically. And so, in those environments, for sure, we've got to take a next extra step if we want to find the right people and want to, more importantly, keep those people around. We have to be willing to create an environment that's as comfortable as possible for them. So those seem like such simple things, and they really are. But it's really important that we don't lose sight of those things.
Very good. How about with the recent situation as far as the packing plants and the supply chain? What are your thoughts there from efficiency and or resilience standpoint?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think the industry should be commended for the response. I mean, it was and continues to be a very painful experience for a lot of people, and so certainly want to recognize that that not only was it a really difficult time for everyone involved, that it continues to be a difficult time. Things have gotten better, but we're not out of the woods yet, and we've still got some real structural issues to deal with. With that said, I've been very impressed with the way the industry has responded. I don't think anybody expected that we would be able to do as good a job as we have as an industry to slow these pigs down and create slack in our systems. It's remarkable what our nutritionists and our managers on the farm have been able to do in terms of, creating slack in a system that just doesn't have a lot of natural slack in it at all.
Yeah.
And so that's been very impressive. And quite frankly, they've done a much better job than I thought was possible. So, that's the industry's to be commended for that. And on the processing side, the reality is they've gotten back, closer to full capacity, much quicker than I anticipated, than I honestly thought was possible. So, it wasn't perfect, and certainly looking back on it, probably we would do some things differently. But I think it's important for people to understand that the industry really rose to the occasion, both on the farm side and on the processing side. And so, that doesn't mean that we can't have a discussion. We got to have a discussion about, how do we improve the resiliency of these supply chains. But I think we need to do that in the context of understanding that this industry really did rise to the occasion and pulled off something that I don't think anybody inside or outside of the industry really thought was possible. Right. And so that's definitely an encouraging thing. And then the other thing I would like to encourage people to think about is it's very natural for us to have this conversation around how do we add some resiliency to the system, but there is a huge amount of value in that efficiency, and so I want to make sure that we don't just throw away that efficiency. It's really easy right now to look at it and say, oh, well, when something like COVID-19 happens, the system falls apart, and so we need to do something different. And that's natural and normal, and I think it's a conversation that absolutely needs to be had. But it needs to be had in the context of, the other 99 years where we didn't have COVID-19, that system worked pretty darn good, and was created a lot of efficiency. And just from an industry standpoint, we need to try to preserve as much of that efficiency as possible while introducing some more resiliency. And then even as we step back in a broader context, just economically speaking, I think, our industry can kind of serve as a microcosm for a bigger picture discussion around, how do we balance that efficiency and resiliency. And I just want to make sure that we keep everything in context, and make sure that we understand that efficiency has a significant amount of value. And so let's try to preserve as much of that efficiency as possible in our pursuit to improve resiliency.
Very good. Do you have any ideas at all on how to bring some resiliency to the situation, or something that you just want to challenge the industry to think about?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think first we have to decide, the general idea here is that as efficiency improves, resiliency goes down, and vice versa. And so they're negatively correlated. And I think in general that's true. And so from that perspective, if we put ourselves in that paradigm, then we have to say, okay, well, how much efficiency are we willing to give up in exchange for how much resiliency? So I think some of the conversation is going to be finding the right balance there. And so I think there's some areas where, we do need to be willing to give up a certain amount of efficiency in exchange for some resiliency. One example of that, just to kind of look at an international global trade component of that, is we found out through the ASF issues that we were very reliant on some ingredients coming out of China. Right. So I know these feed companies, as things got bad in China, a lot of these producers went to their feed suppliers in the U.S. and said, "Hey, we don't want anything that's coming out of China." And the answer very quickly was, "Okay, well, there's for most of this stuff we can do that, but there's some of these ingredients we can't do that on." And so that's a problem. And so I'm not necessarily saying that none of it needs to come from China, but certainly we don't need to be reliant on any international market for that high a percentage of our needs of a core ingredient, an ingredient that is unavoidable. And so certainly we need to rethink that. And if we have to give up some efficiency in order to provide, to repatriate some of that production, or at least to provide some, to spread out that risk among, some more varied set of suppliers, I think that's definitely a wise investment, even if it does mean a reduction in a little bit of efficiency. But my bigger concern is to try to find those innovations that break the paradigm. Those innovations where we can preserve the efficiency and still, recapture some resiliency. So, those are obviously those areas where everybody wants to try to find those. And I think on the processing side, I think artificial intelligence and machine learning and some of that next wave of automation that can really reduce our dependency on human labor, but at the same time be able to adjust for those realities of managing a biological product, right? And that car doors are exactly the same size, and show up in the exact same place every time, and pork loins aren't necessarily that consistent, and so I think implementing these new technologies and taking that automation to the next level, I think frees us up to have a lot less dependence on human labor. Even before COVID-19 on the processing side, that was our biggest obstacle to expanding. Why can't you do more on the processing side? It's labor. And really, arguably, the COVID-19 situation was really just a labor situation as well. And so it's less intense, less urgent on the farm side, but certainly on the processing side, some of those technologies that can reduce our dependence on human labor, or reduce our dependence on physical labor, and shift some of that physical stress onto the machines, and then let the people manage the machines, I think is an opportunity to really increase the resiliency in our systems without having to give away any inefficiency, and perhaps even gaining inefficiency. So obviously, any area in today's environment, as we think about an area that could, in a technology or a strategy or something that we could implement that would improve resiliency and at the same time preserve or even improve efficiency, would be a home run for everybody. So, I know I'm involved in a lot of, thinking through some of those processes and getting that technology implemented. And that's something I'm really focused on. And I hope the industry follows that lead and really focuses on that as a solution there that doesn't have to compromise.
Very good. Any thoughts on the trade side of things, and and exports? What do you have in mind there?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I'm a free trader, and I'm a very big proponent of free trade policies, and that's not a very right now. That's not a very popular position.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, and understandably so, a lot of interest in kind of reshoring production and less dependence on global supply chains, and certainly, like I said before, I mentioned an example before of somewhere where that was strategic, and we need to be careful with that. But I think we need to be more targeted about those production, those areas where we decide to reshore some of those capabilities, or repatriate them, or diversify to other suppliers. But then in a bigger picture, I want to try to preserve a lot of this global trade infrastructure that's been built over the last 10 or 15 years. And the reason is very simple, is that I think that humanity has benefited greatly from that. And so, I know our industry on the pork side, we've become very dependent on exports, and we've become dependent on exports for two main reasons. One, we've gotten a lot better at raising pigs, and so we produce a lot more pigs than we need. But the second issue is there's other places that need pork, and we are the most efficient way to produce it. And so if I look at, I obviously spend a lot of time in China. We can produce pork in the U.S. right now, ship it to China a lot cheaper than they can produce it themselves. Okay, and so finding that balance and trying to create those trade opportunities that are mutually beneficial, I think is really important. And I'm concerned that in the waves of nationalism and kind of anti-globalism, that we don't again give away a lot of the efficiencies that those global supply chains have provided us, and that we're just a little more nuanced and a little more careful as we evaluate those, and to make those decisions thoughtfully and not reactionally, and to really just think through the implications of those, and try to preserve as much of that as we can, while improving that resiliency and providing that security that governments around the world need, to feel secure about their food supply.
No, very interesting comments there, Todd. Anything else on any of these topics before we go to the 3 questions that I ask every guest on the podcast?
No, I think I would just mention that as we sort through kind of the aftermath of COVID-19 and start to think about what the next normal is going to look like, I hope that we can do that thoughtfully, and not, like I said before, not just be reactionary. And so I think we need to definitely take these lessons that we've learned to heart, but also not dismiss the fact that our systems have served us quite well, actually, over the past 10 years, and make sure that we maintain the context that, as difficult as this has been, we've met our needs, right? The system has worked. It's not been pretty, and it's not been without stress, and it's not been without sacrifice that we've been able to achieve this. But our systems worked in a very unpredictable, it gets overused now, the term unprecedented, but the systems did work. And so, let's not completely throw away the existing system as we try to think about what can we do better. So I certainly want us to have that conversation as an industry, and then in broader terms as countries and economies, and really across the board globally, we're going to have this discussion. I just hope we do that in a way that recognizes that I don't think it makes much sense to completely throw away all that we have built over the last 10 or 15 years and all the progress that we've made. And so those are just some things that I just want to encourage people to keep in mind as we sort through what this new normal is going to be, and how we're going to respond to these unprecedented times that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. What's your favorite pig-related book?
Oh, probably the one I use the most is, and you've probably heard this one before, but the Gestating and Lactating Sow, Dr. Farmer's book. I find it to be very timely. I've probably used it as a reference more than any other over the last year or so that I've had it. So it's a great resource. And there's several others, but that one really comes to mind.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a very good book. How about any book in general, not related to pigs, that have changed your life or the way you think?
I'll be a little unconventional. I think I would go with, it's actually a history book, and it's by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it's about Abraham Lincoln. It's called The Team of Rivals, and it's a really thick, intimidating book, but I would say after reading it several times, looking back on it, it's a history book. It's actually a leadership book disguised as a history book, and it really it's a sort of a biography of Lincoln and a history of his presidency, early life and presidency, and obviously that was a formative time in American history. But the discussion, in the title Team of Rivals, it's really how he took a group of people with a very diverse set of opinions, and he surrounded himself not with yes men or with people that were just going to encourage him, but people that were going to challenge him. And so I just think there's a ton of lessons in that experience for business leaders, politicians, basically anybody that's in any sort of leadership position, to kind of value those opinions that might contradict with your own. I know I've learned a lot more from people that disagree with me than I have from people that agree with me, and that mentality I think is really borne out in that book. And so it's big, it's thick, it's really intimidating looking, but I really do think it's worth the read. I've read it probably 2 or 3 times and get something different out of it every time.
Very cool. No, I was not familiar with that book. That's good to know. And then lastly, Todd, what do you think sets apart successful swine professionals from those that are not?
Well, we've talked about it a little bit before, and I think it's that relentless focus on the fundamentals. As I think about, what are the differences between the good farms and the bad farms and the great farms and the good farms, and the difference really is that focus and execution on the fundamentals. Those are the things that are the most common differences I see, or the most common similarities between those good farms, is that they execute consistently on those fundamentals, and that's what they're focused on. They don't get distracted by minor details that don't matter. And so I think that's, to me, in my observation, in my experience, that's been the biggest difference. And so the good news there is there's no secret. Sure, it's always great to learn new things and refine what you know and all those kind of things. But really, from a practical standpoint, and that's where I try to operate is practically, getting results on farms. It's really about taking the stuff you already know and implementing it every day. You go to businesses all the time that you don't really know much about a restaurant, but you think, oh, well, they could do that better, right? Chances are, it's not that they don't know that that's an opportunity. It's just that they fail to execute. For whatever reason, they fail to execute. So I think that same thing applies to farms, and that's where I really that's where I think I can get the most impact, is by helping people focus and execute consistently every day on those fundamentals. And it just has to be done every single day. You can't do it, every once in a while. You can't do it when it's convenient. You have to do it every single day and just be relentless about it. And that's the key to success, in my opinion.
Very cool. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it makes total sense and match some of my bias as well as when I observed some of the most productive herds. So very good, Todd. Really appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It was great joining you.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.